Oh, okay, on to volume 3, I think. But anyway, part 2 of this guy. But we'll go on forever and ever, and ever, and ever, and ever, and ever. Oh, yeah, I should turn this on. Okay, so on with the show and such and so forth. And whatnot.
Species of life, in the grand scheme of things, whether something hurts that species from that species' own perspective or whether it doesn't, there's not much.
Look, species don't have a perspective, so I think that's just kind of bogus. You know, I mean, where do you get that from? Species doesn't have a brain. That's like saying group brain or something. You know, brains are an individually possessed thing, so let's call them what they are. Logic and reason and thought, well, logic is not a species-specific thing. It's a functionality. It's more about the concepts, not the conceptor. All right. So, I mean, I just think it's cheapening the whole idea of intelligence and discovery and definition to make it some sort of species thing. It ain't a species thing. Observing reality and describing reality. It's not species specific. That would just make it all bullshit. It's not. I mean, there's a truth that gets you to the moon. Species specific bullshit doesn't get you to the moon. Anyway.
From the neutral perspective, that would classify something as right or wrong.
Now again, look, you know, we've been over this enough times that this really shouldn't even be an issue. You know, it's not like right or wrong from a human perspective, or right or wrong from the male perspective, or right or wrong from the white male perspective. It's about right or wrong from a universal, absolute perspective. Okay, and the premise is a simple premise that all the logic is built on. You either are convinced by the evidence or you're not. And so the argument is, the premise argument is that suffering matters. That there's a clear, distinguishable, qualitative difference between chemotherapy and a blowjob. That's the fundamental preposition that everything else is built on. That's the core value. That's the quantum kernel of logic that you begin with. And everything else is built on that understanding. So if you can't concede that truth, yeah, then there's no truth argument. There's no argument about anything. Okay, if you can't accept that simple premise, then it's game over, conversation over. Yeah, I might as well go out and have a conversation with a fucking blade of grass.
And I don't think you've taken the radical steps sometimes that you need to start understanding existence separate from these things like morality and from this subjective base that you're coming from.
Again, you say it's subjective. I'm arguing that there's a ton of argument out there. All right, that I've made the argument defending it not as a subjective thing. I'm not saying my knee says so. I'm not saying I intuitively know it to be true. I'm not saying any of that crap. I'm giving you a logical argument. This is the kind of crap I get back. It's just your pronunciation that I know better. And I'm saying you're subjective because I am. Yeah, well, that's not good enough. You're going to have to isolate the subjectivity. So you're saying it's a subjective conclusion based on no observable experiment or evidence that unpleasant sensations are negative, you know, avoidable, aversive, deserving of aversion. Positive sensations are, you know, somehow we shouldn't be attracted to them. Somehow they're not a good thing. That there's some logic somewhere that's going to be able to unravel that. Sorry. Again, you're going to have to point out how I'm wrong in concluding first that there's a huge distinction between these two experiences that consciousness endures, and that they aren't easily identified as positive and negative.
I know there's the argument that a human being can never totally escape, um, that their own brain, totally escape it and understand it separate from their own brain, but they can at least conceptualize instances where, this inherent sense of good or bad isn't there, you know.
Again, it's inherent sense. Who's saying it's an inherent sense? I didn't have it when I was born. I didn't even have it in my youth. All right, it's developed through life experience. You figure this stuff out. You figure out that, oh, yeah, I feel. Other people feel. Yeah, their reactions are similar to mine. Some of them are dissimilar, but the basic fundamental mechanisms are the same. My welfare isn't more important than their welfare. I mean, you come to all these conclusions. It's not some sort of innate thing. No, it's something you observe through life experience. And that you demonstrate through evidence. The evidence convinces you. It's all around you. This is just such bullshit to say that somehow we're just imposing morality for the fun of it. We're making rational, logical arguments describing reality. I mean, you really should give it enough of a... you challenge it with an argument that explains how it is not consistent with a possible reality.
Take a computer. Does a computer have transformations of information that render it something other than just a rock or a piece of material? Does it have a kind of internal coherency and internal system of inputs and outputs that would render it somewhat similar to life?
No, not most life. Most life doesn't have a brain, so it's absolutely nothing like a computer. And the life that's like, that does have a brain, it does have a processing unit. It's running motivational software first. Okay, computer doesn't have any motivational software individual to itself. It just has software. It just has input, output, reflexive reaction. There is no its sentience gets involved, and then it reacts based on how its sentience is influenced. All right, so its reflexes are a different kind of reflex than our reflexes. Okay, ours go through much more transition. It goes through emotion, through raw feeling, and then has to go back out and through the same or different interpreter. So it's just, that doesn't go anywhere. A computer is not a sentient organism. I mean, come on.
And if so, at the same time, is it experiencing this duality of suffering and good feelings? I think most people would say no, that it isn't. But it's still...
Well, look, they aren't a duality anyway. I would argue it's all made out of the same thing. There's suffering and then there's not suffering. Not suffering feels good, suffering feels bad. So to me, it's all one thing. It's all negative, and if you eliminate the negative, you got a positive. But that's a whole separate argument about biology and evolution and our functionality, and I won't get into that. But, so the two things aren't conflicting things or even opposite things. They're just gradations of one thing, which is discomfort. That's the only thing there really is, and then there's a lack of discomfort, which is, I feel great. But yeah, again, this is, you have to have the motivational mechanism to have, unless you have some sort of mandate that something just do logic, that it just add up 2 plus 2. But it's going to be very hard for a computer to conceptualize. I mean, conceptual intelligence is a little more complicated than just throwing words together. It's throwing them together with a feeling. I mean, if you take away the feelings, I think our capacity to conceptualize starts to degrade and diminish and fall apart, because we have no way to judge value anymore. We have no way to judge the integrity of our own logic without a feeling as a reward. That's sort of how the system works. We do logic because we're rewarded for being right. The brain gives you a little candy for that.
Still a kind of unit or entity that has a kind of understanding, because there's this system going on within something like a computer, separate from the sensitivity of most of the animal kingdom. It's arguable whether single-cell organisms experience this notion of suffering that you talk so much about.
I don't even think it's arguable, okay? Except with imbeciles and morons and religious nutballs, okay? There's absolutely no reason, no rational reason, no evidentiary reason to believe a microbe feels. There's just no reason to believe sensation exists anywhere else but in a complex neurological bit of matter. And if you don't have that complexity, if you don't have those neurons and that chemistry, you're not going to be conscious. And we can make something very complex like this unconscious pretty frickin' easily by just destroying a little bit of that structure. You cut off my fucking toes, you're not going to stop me from feeling and thinking. If you cut a few neurons, you can.
But if that's the case, how far can you take it in the other direction, away from this sort of intuitive, moral sense?
Again, I'm not ever talking about any intuitive moral sense. That's just crap people made up because they wanted to say, well, since there's no God, we're going to get our marching orders from biology, and that's just bullshit. I mean, let the DNA tell us what to do, or let the trees tell us what to do, or some other kind of crap. And that's just nonsense. This is nothing about being intuitive. This has to do with doing science, doing logic, doing rationality, discovering evidence, and applying the evidence. I mean, this has nothing to do with any intuition.
And is it still a kind of understanding? And I think it is. I don't know how much you've done to try to empathize with those positions, but when you do, a lot of these evaluative judgments you make about reality and the way things are, I think that...
Well, you're going to have to qualify those. Exactly what value judgments do you again say that are illegitimate for some reason, that are just a dogma? I make the argument, I go through it extensively, why I believe this to be wrong, what I'm adding up. It's not that fucking complicated, alright? If I see you're going to harm something that's capable of being harmed, you have to come up with a rational excuse for why the harm is justified. It's not that fucking complicated. Come on.
Start to break down, because you realize how, these arguments that you make so much, when you say, oh yeah, how can I justify one kid, dying of cancer? What makes that worth it? Well, where is your basis of what worth it coming from?
Well, my basis is just like, would I be willing to experience it for somebody else's orgasm? Or even for my own? Can I take any event in my life, any year of my life, and I would say, okay, make me experience 2 years of dying of cancer as a 7 or 8-year-old kid. Okay, let me experience that, and I get the reward of being married to Christina Applegate for 1 year. I mean, yeah, I can imagine the two circumstances, and I can say, well, would I pay that for that? And I'm just saying, my brain, when it puts those two things together, okay, it can't say that's worth it, because I know that donut, that little prize, that little fun time, really isn't worth anything. It's just me satisfying an addiction. It's really kind of trivial and silly, and that hard suffering is going to be just that, hard fucking hours and hours and hours of agony, and no fucking way would I go to the store and say, yes, here's my willingness to spend 2 years doing chemo for the prize that I still would like, but yeah, I'm not going to pay that much for it. No fucking way.
Are you capable of separating yourself from that and talking philosophy from that perspective? Or are you constantly going to approach it from this, to me, highly subjective state?
Well, again, you just keep making the accusation with absolutely nothing. You don't make a pointed argument. So if you're going to sit there and say that some moral tude some statement I've made is somehow covered with subjective chocolate or something, whatever your accusation is, well then fucking point to it. All right, but this crap, I just explained how I made the equation with the kid with cancer. I'm saying, well, you can have a different evaluation. Maybe you're willing to do chemo for 2 years for 1 year of, okay, you still have to go to work and you still have to live all the other life. You just get to, have a good time now and then. Yeah, so maybe you'd make a different value equation. I didn't say it as this is the absolute truth. I'm just saying that I don't get it. Logically, I can't make any sense out of anybody who would say that was worth it. Okay? So that wasn't exactly a dogmatic statement, but when I'm talking about something else's suffering, I'm just making the point that you can't win at something else's expense. That's not that fucking complicated. So unexplain it. Explain how it is not rational to say, well, I can't kill or harm 7 people to satisfy my one individual person needs. That somehow is obviously not going to make any sense. You can't destroy 7 of something to preserve 1 of it and say that's logical.
There is a certain degree of detachedness that comes if you really want to understand reality for how it is, separate from your own personal subjective approaches.
Oh, whatever. So says you. What book did you read that crap in? Whose dogma? Whose kneecap dogma is that? Babble.
And that's why a lot of the criticisms of your philosophy have always been that you're kind of like a univocal individual, because it's always attached, all of your analysis of anything is always attached to this evolution, production, reproduction. You die, there's no fulfillment in it.
Oh, yeah, it's always attached to what one could describe as the dissectable truth that you just can't avoid. These are just the facts of our life. And now you're going to say we didn't evolve? That there is a little happy unicorn behind it all? I mean, come on.
And I think in order to for human beings to progress, they have to externalize from their own experience long enough to contemplate other forms of life and other forms of understanding that aren't attached to this state of the game.
Yeah, well, again, that's just crap. It's just talk. So you're saying that somehow when an alien does logic, the logic doesn't work out the same way. When they fly to the moon, they don't do the same kind of physics. I mean, come on. All right? I mean, unless you're going to say they don't have sentience, which I don't think is possible. I really don't think it's possible to naturally evolve intelligence without first evolving sentience, because the intelligence has to have a mission, or it's just going to sit there and say, fuck you. I mean, so that's just, so whatever. But this is just jargon to say that the aliens have some other super special perspective, that their pink donuts are better than our black donuts. It's just stupid.
That you have so well laid out in your videos, but for which aren't really that productive from my perspective in terms of bringing about change. You're so set on describing reality, how it is from a common human experience in today's century, or arguably in the context.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, we'll see. Maybe you're going to say the right thing here. Yeah, this is the context of existence. I'm not doing a century thing or a time thing. I mean, really. I mean, it's sort of insulting to sit there and say that I don't know what time is, and that I can't figure out that, okay, you got to avoid the traps of your generation.
Of the human species, sometimes in the animal kingdom. But the thing about the universe and time is that we have no ability to contemplate the extent of it. It's infinity, so that is a very small context of what the universe and what truth is. It's a very...
Yeah, well, really, that's another sort of bogus argument just because you really don't know this, okay? I mean, an infinity of nothing is nothing. So, infinite zero is not much of a anything. So that's not really daunting. And we really don't know, we don't know the context. But it really doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't change the rules of logic here. It doesn't change the, um, it doesn't. I don't think you could ever go to any perspective. I don't care how big the infinity gets. Okay, a suffering consciousness is a suffering consciousness. You just can't undo it.
Very, even the 5 billion years or so that the world has been around, that is just a very small context in the grander scheme of what the cosmos is. And the experiences you describe when you talk about evolution of life are, secluded and isolated within that context. And I think when you start getting into this determinism stuff, which are better understood through the analogy of physics, it's easy to, or it's more, you're more able to escape kind of organically centered.
Again, with this organic, again, this has something to do with life. I don't care. We could create a synthetic consciousness. I mean, it really, it doesn't, there's probably a mechanism, a chemistry that creates consciousness, a minimum constituents that you need to create something that will go ouch. Okay, it might not say the word, but it will feel that ouch. But what, I mean, it's just silly to keep talking as if it doesn't fucking matter whether we are sentient or not in terms of the fact that drawing the conclusion that sensation has a distinguishable, identifiable substance. It is as real as any other phenomenon in nature. I mean, magnetism or gravity or some other force. It is a thing. It is an identifiable, distinct, recognizably different thing. And so, and just pointing out that that difference is meaningful and substantial is not just an organic activity. It's logical.
Analyses about what the state of reality is, and start to understand events separate from the moralities and the value judgments that give those events color.
Oh yeah, well whatever. You're just doing the opposite. You're just sitting there, instead of saying that it means something, you're just saying I'm just going to pretend it doesn't mean anything, even though it could mean something, even though there's evidence that it might mean something. I'm just going to pretend it doesn't mean anything, and I'm just going to say so. And nobody's going to stop me from saying so, and nothing's going to squash me because I'm wrong, so I can get away with it. But you're just discounting it because you can. Well, so fucking what? You haven't discounted it logically. You've just discounted it because that apparently is what you want to do.
And see them as part and parcel of a larger process for which these might just be the building blocks towards something else.
Yeah, again, just like we can all make up any fucking weird-ass bullshit story we want to, right? I mean, the whole universe is really a bottle of nicotine liquid and blah, 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 and we're really just going to get snorted by some giant, elephantoid in the Parkarki dimension. I mean, we can all just make up some sort of bullshit that somehow this makes sense. It's just doing what God does, right? God is saying we're here to learn a lesson, and that's why they're suffering, and it all makes sense in the end, and it's not for yours to wonder why. It's for God to kill you and fuck you over and whatever. God's will be done because God knows best. You're just saying, well, the universe knows best. We better not apply our intelligence to the question because the universe knows best. Bullshit. There's no evidence the universe knows anything at all.
Oh, and the value that was once there doesn't take on the same light when seen from grander or more narrow contexts.
Well, why would I go? Well, I don't know. Well, grander context. What is that? I mean, that's not even a very good way to put it, is it? If you're going to be scientific and all, grander context. You mean more expansive context? And again, you're just making the argument. You're just making up a god. You're just saying the spaghetti monster's out there and he knows what he's doing. So, who are you to judge? Who are you to get occupied in dissecting the world around you? It's not your job to dissect and be rational and logical. No, the universe knows what it's doing. Just get in line. Just get in line. Wear your suit. You know, speak your poobah, and get about your business. You know, tie your shoes properly, and don't be bothered with this judgment thing. Okay, it's not your job. I mean, this is just bullshit.
Couple of thoughts for you.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, they came with sort of that same old arrogant tone. That's really bullshit, you know, for your age. I mean, you really are a little bit full of yourself. Um, you know, I mean, I've spent a lot of years thinking about this stuff, so I really don't think you're going to unravel it. Well, especially not with those kind of tools. You're going to have to do a little better than the universe might be knowing what it's doing, you know, maybe, possibly, even though we have no evidence that it has a brain or any agenda whatsoever. Yeah, you're really gonna have to do better than that. So anyway, so that's probably two or three of these things, and so we'll move on to the stupid old broken mech guy, Canada, whatever he is. And then that wise monkey guy kind of disappointed. I mean, he made a video where the first half made sense and the second half was just crap. Like, you know, if we say hello to somebody, it undoes the suffering of their chemotherapy. And somehow we learn, you know, if there's a good Holocaust and lots of people die horribly, it'll all give us a little 5 minutes of attrition, you know, a little sense of, oh, isn't that terrible? And, you know, we'd be better people for 5.5 minutes, and therefore it's worth it because we were better people for 5.5 minutes. I mean, it's just such a, you know, Pollyanna all over the place. Damn. Anyway, so till next time and such. So forth. Yeah, so on to the next pile of shit. Yeah. Yeah, I hit the button. Come on, you can do it. Turn off.